Happy New Year. Happy 2018. We are going to dig deep into how the left and their mainstream media counterparts left 2017 as discredited as they entered it, as we break down their reaction to the Iranian protests. Now, these protests in Iran could be earth-changing. If there's regime change, we might possibly have an ally in the region and an ally in a country that's one of the greatest state sponsors of terror and one of our greatest enemies. See, this is significant because the people in Iran are by and large secular. They're pro-West. They don't want to live under an Islamo-fascist regime controlled by mullahs any more than we do. They want to be free. They want to have the internet. The women want to shop at Gucci and Louboutin. The men want to go buy custom suits and drive Porsches and Ferraris. These are highly educated people with the ability to make a lot of money, and they want to live well. They're over it. They're done. Now, if you recall, protests had sprung up during the Obama administration, and he did nothing. We now know he did nothing to preserve his disastrous Iran deal. Obama leaving those protesters on the street was reminiscent of John Kennedy leaving the anti-Castro fighters on the beach during the Bay of Pigs, left them on the beach to be slaughtered. And we've had Castro, a communist enemy 90 miles off Key West, ever since. So let's look at some of the reactions from former Obama administration officials to the protests. Susan Rice. I'm going to go through the tweets because these people have been very vocal on Twitter, and then I'm going to go through a timeline of just how abysmal CNN's coverage was a little bit later in the segment. But let's start with the Obama administration officials. Susan Rice. You remember Susan Rice, the one who went out there and sold us that Benghazi was over a YouTube video? A woman who should be under investigation? A woman who unmasked U.S. persons alongside her friend Samantha Power? We're going to get to Samantha Power as well, but let's see what Susan Rice said. How can Trump help Iran's protesters? Question mark. Be quiet, in reference to a New York Times op-ed of the same title. Be quiet. These people need our help, Susan Rice. They need our support. But no, Susan Rice wants us to channel her capitulating buddy Obama, the guy that Neville Chamberlain bullied in high school. No, we're not going to be quiet, Ambassador Rice. We're going to help these Iranian protesters. We're going to support them. We want democracy in the region, unlike you and your boss, Barry. How about one of my favorites, Samantha Power, former UN ambassador, Cass Sunstein's wife, far leftist, ideological leftists. We stand with this is her jab at President Trump. We stand with the Iranian people so much that we won't let them come here. No, we've cracked down on immigration to a global state sponsor of terror, their government. We and they have the same objective right now, to get rid of the mullahs, to get rid of the Islamo-fascist hardliners. We do not want these people in power. The Iranian people do not want these people in power. They don't want to live under Islamo-fascist maniacs who beat the women for not wearing hijabs. They don't want to live that way, Samantha Power. So stop with these snarky comments because you're another one who enabled the Iran deal. Now we're getting to my two favorites. Ben Rhodes. Remember Ben Rhodes, one of Obama's national security advisors. The Iranian people are rightfully demanding dignity, less corruption, more opportunity, and greater control over their lives. In looking at U.S. Twitter, it seems lost on too many that this is about what Iranians want for Iran and not about us. Really, Ben? When you and your boss, Barack Obama, and the other moron, John Kerry, were sending pallets of cash, billions upon billions upon billions of U.S. dollars to the mullahs, when you were enabling their cooperation with North Korea on a nuke program, did you care about dignity for the Iranian people, less corruption for the Iranian people, and more opportunity for the Iranian people? Did you care, as you say, about greater control over their own lives for the Iranian people? No, you enrich the people who are oppressing them, you lying hack. And my favorite, buffoon of the decade, buffoon of the century, a guy who doesn't even look like he can form a coherent sentence, former Secretary of State John Kerry. Now, this is my favorite. Let me read this to you, his tweet, John Kerry's tweet on the Iran protests. With humility about how little we know about what's happening inside Iran, this much is clear. It's an Iranian moment and not anyone else's. But the rights of people to protest peacefully and voice their aspirations are universal, and governments everywhere should respect that. Now, we're going to break this down. Let's give us the former Secretary of State. This is the guy who, alongside Obama, sold us the Iran deal as a good thing. This is the guy who, alongside Obama, approved dropping billions upon billions of US dollars, pallets of cash, on a runway in Tehran in the middle of the night. Tried to do it under our noses, but we found out about it. Think about this. With humility, how little we know about what's happening inside Iran. He's admitting we know nothing about what's happening inside Iran, but he went ahead with the Iran deal and he gave them billions of US dollars anyway. The guy's admitting they did it blindly. Although I don't think they did it blindly. I think they did this. They did this in a way that was very specific, very targeted, and very calculated. They wanted the mullahs to stay in power. They want globalism. They want an enemy. They need that to keep their globalist agenda going. Now, a really disturbing story dropped from in the Times of Israel. Not disturbing because of the content. The content is awesome, but disturbing because it leaked. And the story's title is Kuwaiti Report. The report comes out of Kuwait to the Times of Israel. U.S. gives Israel go ahead to kill powerful Iranian general. And they're talking about Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Guards, the head of the Quds Force. He's like a Goebbels, a Lavrenti Beria, a Gaddafi, all rolled into one. Think of the worst, most brutal guys that ever ran fascist intelligence services and military units, and in this case, special operations unit, all rolled into one really horrible guy. So I love the fact that Israel wants to kill him. I love the fact that if this report is true, we're giving Israel the green light and support they need. But what I don't like is that it leaked. Now, disturbingly, I suspect that this leak came from our side, from the U.S., not from Israel. Israel has some pretty damn good operational security. The Mossad doesn't really leak, nor do their special operations units within the IDF. So it says to me that if this report is accurate, that the leak came from some Obama holdovers in state, maybe CIA. Disturbingly, maybe even Obama holdovers or globalist loyalists on our own National Security Council. And if that's the case, that is very, very dangerous because Soleimani is a really bad guy and he needs to go. He simply needs to go. Now let's look at the news coverage of the Iran protests by what has turned out to be the most reprehensible fake news outlet on the planet. Now there's a lot of competition when you consider the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC. But again, our friends over at CNN take the cake. So let's run down CNN's Twitter feed as these protests were unfolding. They sounded at first like a propaganda outlet for Soleimani and the mullahs. Okay, on December 30th at 12:15 p.m., right around noon, the day before New Year's Eve, CNN tweets, Iran's government warns against illegal gatherings after protests. On CNN story, they used a photo. First of all, they called the protests illegal and pro-government. They flat out lied. They had to correct it later on. And the photo they used was from the Tasnim news agency, which is the Iranian propaganda outlet controlled by the mullahs. CNN took a news feed, a photo feed, from an Iranian government-controlled news outlet. CNN went on to tweet, at 5:56 a.m. on New Year's Eve morning, Iranian government issues stern warning that protesters will pay the price after anti-government demonstrations throughout the country turn deadly. Does that not sound like propaganda for the Quds Force? Hey, you protesters, you better stand down or it's going to get ugly for you. CNN wasn't even trying to be objective. Now, right after that first tweet I read you by CNN, they started getting beaten up. People were beating the hell out of them. But CNN isn't going to do a reversal, right? So they get a little bit tepid. They start to pull back a little bit and make even bigger fools of themselves. This was one of my favorite. At 11:30 a.m. on New Year's Eve morning, Eastern Time, CNN tweeted, Iran's protests are partly a reaction to a sputtering economy, but there's something bigger at play. Really? A sputtering economy? No. No. Because what CNN ignored, what CNN left out was that image that has now gone globally viral of the woman ripping off her hijab and waving it around as she stood on a podium. You see, CNN doesn't want to admit what the protests are really about. Oppressive Islamo-fascist rule and people having enough with it because it cuts into CNN's narrative that Islam is a religion of peace, that Iran isn't a state sponsor of terror, and most importantly, that the Iran deal, the disastrous Iran deal that gave Iran nukes and allowed them to collaborate with North Korea on the nuke program, that gave Iran billions upon billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars, And remember all those Obama administration officials tweeting about control over their lives, the Iranian people control over their lives in peaceful protests? Well, those billions upon billions that Obama, John Kerry, Ben Rhodes, Susan Rice, Samantha Power approved to go to Iran? Well, how do you think the Iranian military is buying the weapons they're now using to oppress the protesters with the money the Obama administration gave them? So yes, CNN, it is about something bigger. It is about something much bigger than just the economy. It's about freedom. It's about liberty. Things you leftists over at CNN apparently hate. A little bit later that evening, 10:46 p.m. on New Year's Eve, Eastern Time, CNN, I guess Captain Obvious joined the editorial team at CNN. Here's why the Iran protests are significant. Thank you, Captain Obvious at CNN. Well, then CNN had to do a total reversal, and it pained them because they were getting beaten down so badly on Twitter for their biased coverage. CNN issued a tweet at 3:19 p.m. yesterday, New Year's Day. Quote, the biggest anti-government protests in Iran since 2009 have turned the spotlight on President Hassan Rouhani's economic record. No, it's not about economics, but at least they're admitting baby steps, baby steps. At least CNN is admitting that they are anti-government protests. But that didn't last long. That didn't last long because at 6:32 a.m. this morning, CNN tweeted again, Iran's supreme leader blames enemies for sparking days of anti-government protests as the death toll rises to 21. Now, if you read CNN's tweet, it is clearly worded to imply that enemies of the supreme leader are the ones responsible for the deadly aftermath of the protests, not the oppressive Iranian government, not the supreme leader in the mullahs, not Qasem Soleimani and the Guards Force and the Quds Force. No. It's the protesters who are to blame. It's the enemies of the supreme leader who are to blame. You see, CNN is in cahoots with the Obama administration. They need to preserve the narrative. They need to preserve the Iran deal, and they need to keep up the charade that leftists actually know how to govern, when in fact, they are foreign policy disasters. Absolute disasters. But when you piece these puzzles together, we leave them nowhere to go. That's why I love doing this kind of analysis for you. Now, the other thing about CNN that bothers me is, why do they still have White House, State Department, and congressional press credentials? Seriously, I am the biggest defender of the First Amendment. But CNN can no longer bill themselves as hard news. They are left-wing biased opinion. Look, here at The Rebel, we admit we're a conservative media outlet. But I can say this. I can look in this camera and say this to you with the utmost confidence. Our editorial process is now far more stringent than CNN's. It is. I've got impeccable sources. You see the people I bring on my show. Sebastian Gorka, Scott Eulinger, a former CIA station chief. You're going to see a lot more of them as my show expands. And there are days when I argue with my editor, with the editors, about using source material because it might be anonymous. Probably because my source is very sensitive and confidential. And even though they know who my source is, they still don't want to run it because they want you, the audience, to have the utmost confidence that we're bringing you the truth. But that isn't so for the New York Times, for the Washington Post, for CNN. The New York Times will slander President Trump on one anonymous source. The Washington Post will do it on one anonymous source. And CNN will publicly propagandize for the mullahs, for the oppressors in Iran. You're smarter now. And it's long past time for better media outlets to be credentialed, to be given those front row seats in the White House press room, to be given those first, second, and third questions. Because the mainstream media, well, they've done my job for me. Every day, outlets like CNN, they debunk themselves. If you like this content, I want to keep bringing it to you, and I'm going to be bringing it to you with a much longer show. So please subscribe to our premium service at www.therebel.media/shows. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back with you tomorrow.